The hum is the first thing you forget, and the last thing you remember. It's the sound of 100 lives in quiet crisis, filtered through fiber optics and processed by people who've trained their souls to be calm. For 10 years, that hum was the soundtrack to my life. I was Liam, the steady hand on the other end of the line, the voice of reason in the storm of someone else's worst day. I'd heard it all. The panicked whispers of a home invasion, the gurgling last breath of a car crash victim, the chillingly calm confession of a murderer. I thought I was immune, that the emotional Kevlar I wore every shift was impenetrable. I was wrong. The call that broke me didn't come from a burning building or a bloody crime scene. It came from a place far darker, far older, and far closer than I could ever imagine. My life was a monument to routine. Wake at 3 p.m., drink coffee black enough to dissolve a spoon, drive the familiar route to the downtown emergency communications center, and plug myself in for another 8 hours of controlled chaos. I was a good operator, fast, efficient, detached. My supervisor, Sarah, a woman whose pragmatism was legendary, often used my call recordings for training new recruits. "Listen to how he never raises his voice," she'd say. "That's control." The vulnerability that cracked me open wasn't dramatic. It was the quiet, gnawing grief from my grandfather's passing 2 months prior. He was a storyteller, a man who believed in omens and whispers on the wind. I, on the other hand, was a creature of logic and evidence. His death left a void, a silent space in my life that I filled with longer shifts and a deepening cynicism. The world was a chaotic, random place. There were no ghosts, only the echoes of trauma we carry inside us. That night started like any other Tuesday. A fender bender on the interstate, a domestic dispute that resolved itself before the squad car arrived, a teenager calling about a UFO that turned out to be a weather balloon. Mundane. I was halfway through my shift, nursing a lukewarm coffee, when line 4 blinked. I tapped the screen. 911. What is your emergency? My voice was automatic, a well-oiled machine. The response was a burst of static, a sound like gravel being swirled in a tin can. Then, a voice. It was thin, reedy, and stretched taut with a terror so pure it bypassed my professional filters and went straight to my spine. "Help, please. I can't breathe." I straightened in my chair. "Sir, I need your location. Where are you?" The static swelled and ebbed. "I don't know. It's dark. So dark." His breathing was a ragged, percussive sound, punctuated by a wet, desperate gasping. "Sir, are you trapped? What's around you?" There was a pause, and in that silence, I heard another sound. A faint, rhythmic scratching. Scrape, scrape, scrape. "Wood," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I'm in a box. God, I think I'm buried." My training kicked into high gear, overriding the cold dread snaking up my back. Drunk, high, psychotic break. Those were the logical boxes to put this in. "Sir, I'm trying to trace your call, but the signal is very weak. Can you tell me your name? What happened?" "Arthur," he sobbed. The scratching grew more frantic. "They put me here, after the funeral. It was a mistake." Sarah, drawn by the tension in my posture, had walked over and plugged her own headset into my console. She listened for a moment, her brow furrowed, then she gave me a look, the one that said, "Crank call." She scribbled on a notepad, "Can't get a trace. Weak signal, bouncing off 3 different towers. Tell him we can't help without a location and disconnect." I hated it, but she was right. It was procedure. "Sir, without a location, I can't dispatch anyone. Is there anything else you can tell me?" The man, Arthur, let out a wail of such profound despair that I physically recoiled. "No. Please don't." The line went dead, replaced by the mundane hum of the call center. I sat back, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sound of that scratching was etched into my brain. Sarah patted my shoulder. "You get them sometimes, Liam. Don't let it get to you. Probably some kids with a soundboard." I nodded, trying to believe her. I filed the report, logged it as unsubstantiated claim, insufficient location data, and took the next call. But for the rest of my shift, Every burst of static on the line, every pause between words, was filled with the sound of that desperate scratching from inside a dark wooden box. An hour later, line 4 blinked again. The same unlisted number. My hand trembled as I answered. 911. "It's so cold down here," Arthur's voice whispered, the static crackling around his words like a dying fire. "She put me here, Eleanor. She always hated my coughing." He broke into a fit of hacking coughs, a dry, rattling sound that seemed to echo from a deep, hollow place. Blackwood. Blackwood Cemetery. Blackwood Cemetery, I repeated, my fingers flying across the keyboard. "Sir, are you in Blackwood Cemetery?" "Yes, but it's wrong. They shouldn't have put me in yet. I wasn't ready." The scratching started again, louder now, splintering. I could almost feel the splinters under my own fingernails. Then, the line died again. I ran a quick search for recent burials at Blackwood Cemetery. Nothing under the name Arthur. No recent funerals at all. I tried cross-referencing with missing persons reports. Nothing. It made no sense. But the terror in his voice. It was the most genuine thing I had ever heard. Sarah told me to drop it, that I was chasing a ghost. I wish I had listened. I was a man of logic, standing at the edge of an abyss, telling myself it was just a trick of the light. But I had a terrible feeling that I was about to fall in. The call became an obsession, a splinter in my mind. For the next 2 days, I couldn't shake it. At work, I found myself listening to the recording over and over, straining to hear something beyond the static and the sobs. Each time, the sheer, undiluted panic in Arthur's voice felt like a physical blow. My colleagues started giving me worried looks. Liam, the unflappable rock of the night shift, was starting to crumble. Sarah pulled me aside after a shift. "Liam, you need to let this go. It was a prank. A sick one, but a prank. You're dwelling on it. Is this about your grandfather?" I wanted to lash out, to tell her she didn't understand, but I just shook my head. "I'm fine," I lied. But I wasn't. The world of logic and procedure that had always been my fortress was failing me. So I did what any desperate man does. I stepped outside of it. On my day off, I drove to the city's main library, to the musty, forgotten basement where they kept the newspaper archives on microfiche. The air was thick with the smell of decaying paper and dust, a tomb of forgotten stories. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I had to find something. I started with Blackwood Cemetery. For hours, I scrolled through grainy images of obituaries and local news, my eyes burning from the dim glow of the reader. I found articles about vandalism, about the city council debating its upkeep, about local ghost tours that mentioned it. It was just a place, a collection of stones and bones. Then I found it, an article from a small local gazette dated October 12, 1928. The headline read, "Local magnate laid to rest amidst peculiar rumors." My blood ran cold as I read. The article was about Arthur Pike, a notoriously cruel and wealthy landowner known for his explosive temper and a persistent rattling cough. He had died suddenly from what was officially called a respiratory ailment. He was survived by his much younger wife, Eleanor, but the article focused on the whispers that surrounded his death. Rumors that Eleanor, tired of his cruelty, had conspired with the town doctor to administer a paralytic agent derived from a rare plant, a substance that mimicked death. The story, dismissed by the paper as ghoulish folklore, was that Arthur Pike had been buried alive in the family mausoleum at Blackwood Cemetery. The names: Arthur, Eleanor, Blackwood, Cemetery. It couldn't be a coincidence. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This wasn't a prank. It was something else, something impossible. My search became more frantic, a desperate plunge into the digital rabbit hole of local history blogs and occult forums. That's where I found him, a man named Alistair Abernathy, a retired history professor who ran a blog dedicated to paranormal geography and psychic echoes. His website was a mess of outdated HTML and grainy photos, but one post held me captive. It was titled "The Echo Call of Blackwood." Abernathy wrote that certain locations, saturated with extreme emotion, could hold a psychic residue. A moment of profound terror, he theorized, could imprint itself onto the very fabric of the place, creating an echo that could repeat under specific atmospheric or electromagnetic conditions. He mentioned Arthur Pike by name. He called it a looping psychic scream, an agony so powerful it had stained the land itself. Then I read the paragraph that made the breath catch in my throat. Abernathy speculated that as technology evolved, so did the ways these echoes could manifest. They could interfere with radio waves, with television signals, and, he hypothesized, with the digital networks that now crisscross the globe. He ended the post with a chilling warning that felt like it was written just for me. To hear the echo is one thing. It is a passive event. But to answer it, to engage with it, is to create a bridge. The echo is not intelligent, but it is primal. It is raw agony seeking a release, an anchor in the living world. To acknowledge it is to invite it. And once invited, it seeks to ground itself in a new consciousness, to find a new box in which to suffocate. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the screen. Unknown caller. I felt a wave of nausea. This was it. The point of no return. My logical mind screamed at me to throw the phone against the wall, to run out of the library and never look back. But my duty, the ingrained instinct of 10 years on the job, was stronger. Someone was in trouble, even if that someone was a ghost. My hand shaking, I answered the call. Hello? It was Arthur's voice, but the static was gone. It was crystal clear, as if he were whispering directly into my ear, and the terror was gone, replaced by a horrifying, calm resignation. It's so cold, he said, his voice a low, intimate murmur. But I can feel you now. The line is so clear. You answered. You're my witness. And then, another sound came through the phone. It wasn't Arthur's scratching. It was a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate through the plastic of the phone and into the bones of my hand. It was a sound of ancient malevolence, of something that had been waiting in the dark with Arthur for a very, very long time. I slammed the phone down, my breath coming in ragged bursts. I looked around the dusty, silent library basement. The rows of shelves seemed to press in on me. The silence no longer peaceful, but predatory. I wasn't investigating a strange call anymore. I had answered a door that should have remained shut for eternity. And something on the other side now knew my name. The world I knew, the one built on logic and procedure, had been a flimsy facade. Now, it was torn away, and I was exposed to the raw, screaming madness that lay beneath. My comfortable reality had become a coffin, and the walls were closing in. The haunting was no longer confined to a phone line. It had latched onto me. The sterile safety of my apartment, once my refuge from the chaos of my job, became the primary stage for my torment. It began subtly, a faint scratching sound from inside the walls of my bedroom as I tried to sleep. At first, I dismissed it as mice, the building settling. But the sound was rhythmic, deliberate. Scrape, scrape, scrape. It was the sound of splintering wood, of a desperate bid for freedom, and it followed me from room to room. Then came the static. It was a low hum at the edge of my hearing, a constant companion. I'd be watching television, and during a moment of silence, the hiss of white noise would bleed through. I'd be driving, and the radio would sputter with that same gravelly crackle from the first call. No one else could hear it. I asked my neighbor if he was having electrical problems. He looked at me like I was insane. The visual tricks started next. Fleeting shadows in my peripheral vision, always the same shape. A long, dark rectangle, the dimensions of a coffin. I'd whip my head around, my heart pounding, only to find nothing there. The line between my world and Arthur's nightmare was dissolving. His prison was becoming mine. I knew I was in trouble. I tried talking to Sarah, cornering her in the break room with a wild look in my eyes. I laid out the whole story. The 1928 newspaper article, Abernathy's blog, the impossible clarity of the final call. She listened with a practiced therapeutic patience, her face a mask of professional concern. "Liam," she said softly, placing a hand on my arm. "You've been under a lot of stress. Your grandfather, this job, it wears people down. Maybe you should use some of your vacation time. See a counselor. We have resources for that. She thought I was breaking down. And why wouldn't she? I sounded like a madman. I turned to my best friend Mark, a cynical ER nurse who had seen his own share of horror. We met for a beer and I told him everything. He listened, then took a long drink and laughed. A ghost in the machine? Dude, you've been watching too many horror movies. You need to get laid. It was a prank call that got under your skin. You're connecting it to your grandpa's death. It's textbook. The skeptic, the voice of reason I used to be. His dismissal was more terrifying than any ghost. It was the final nail in the coffin of my isolation. There was no one to call, no one to help. The 911 operator was in an emergency of his own, and all the lines were busy. My desperation morphed into a feverish need to fight back. I tried blocking the unknown numbers, but the calls still came through, now displaying my own number on the caller ID. I unplugged my landline. I started leaving my cell phone at home, but the ringing would persist. A phantom vibration in my pocket, a disembodied ringtone only I could hear. One evening, I came home from a grocery run to find a thin, perfect rectangle of damp, black soil on my doormat. It was graveyard dirt. I knew it instantly. I stared at it, my blood turning to ice. It was a message, a promise. He wasn't just in the phone anymore. He was here. He was outside, and he wanted in. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. When exhaustion finally claimed me, I was plunged into suffocating nightmares. I was in the box, the oppressive weight of the earth pressing down on me. The smell of damp soil and rotting velvet filled my nostrils. My throat was raw from screaming, but no sound came out. My own hands, raw and bleeding, would be scratching at the lid above me. I would wake up gasping for air, my sheets soaked in sweat, the phantom smell of the grave lingering in my room. My sanity was fraying, thread by thread. I stopped going to work, calling in sick with vague excuses. My apartment became my prison, a space I patrolled with a growing paranoia. I spent my waking hours listening to the recordings of Arthur's calls, my own calm, professional voice, a mocking echo from a life that no longer existed. With each replay, Arthur's voice sounded stronger, clearer, while mine seemed to fade, as if the connection were a parasite, draining the life from me to feed his spectral agony. I was no longer just a witness. I was becoming a part of the echo. The final act began on a rain-lashed Thursday night. I was huddled in my living room, the lights off, watching the storm rage outside. I had done everything I could think of. I'd lined my windowsills with salt, a half-remembered piece of folklore from my grandfather. I'd even called Alistair Abernathy, the historian from the blog. The old man listened patiently, his voice crackling with age. He offered no solutions, only a grim validation. "You've formed a sympathetic bond," he'd said. "It's a psychic entanglement. It thinks you're a way out. I'm sorry, my boy, but these things, they don't let go easily." Then, my personal cell phone, which I had left on the kitchen counter, began to ring. I hadn't given the number to anyone at work. Only a handful of people had it. But I knew who was calling. The ringtone, a cheerful, generic tune, was a grotesque counterpoint to the dread that seized me. This was it, the confrontation. I walked to the kitchen, each footstep a thunderclap in the silent apartment. I picked up the phone. The caller ID was my own name. I pressed the green icon. "I'm almost free," Arthur's voice said. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a deep, resonant baritone, filled with a triumphant, graveyard cold. "You listened so well. You made me real again. But the box needs a new tenant. It's only fair. A soul for a soul. It's your turn, Liam." An invisible force slammed into me. It was a physical pressure, a crushing weight on my chest that stole my breath. It felt like tons of wet earth piling on top of me. The lights in my apartment flickered violently and then died, plunging me into absolute darkness. The only light was the pale, sickly glow of the phone screen in my hand. The scratching started, but it wasn't coming from the phone. It was loud, frantic, and immediate. It was coming from right behind me, from inside my own apartment. A primal scream tore from my throat. I stumbled backward, dropping the phone. I was blind, disoriented, suffocating. The scratching grew louder, closer, the sound of long, jagged nails dragging across floorboards. This was the end. I would die here, in the dark, my heart giving out from sheer terror, and my soul would be crammed into that rotting box 6 feet under Blackwood. No. A flicker of defiance, the last ember of the man I used to be flared to life. I wouldn't be a victim. I wouldn't be a replacement. My hand, scrambling in the dark, found something heavy and solid on an end table, the base of a thick glass lamp. I gripped it like a club. "Get out of my house!" I roared into the oppressive blackness. The scratching stopped. In the silence, I heard a wet, gurgling breath right next to my ear. I swung the lamp with all the strength I had, a desperate, blind arc into the darkness where the sound had come from. There was no impact, no satisfying thud of glass hitting flesh. Instead, there was an unearthly shriek, a sound of tearing static and digital corruption that pierced my ears and rattled my teeth. The crushing pressure on my chest vanished instantly. The air rushed back into my lungs. The lights flickered back on, buzzing and weak. The room was empty. There was no one there. But on the floor, where I had swung, lay the source of the connection. My cell phone. Its screen was a spiderweb of shattered glass. I knelt, my body trembling uncontrollably. As I watched, the shattered screen glowed for one final horrifying second. An image burned itself onto the broken display, like an old photograph developing. It was the face of a man, his features twisted in a mask of silent, suffocating terror. His mouth was wide open, screaming into an eternal void. It wasn't Arthur's face. It was mine. The screen went black. The connection was severed. The echo was gone. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my very soul, what the price had been. To break the line, I had to smash the receiver. I had to offer it a piece of myself. A sacrifice. An echo of my own terror to take the place of Arthur's. I survived the night, but the Liam who had answered that first call was dead and buried. I quit my job the next day. I couldn't stand the sound of a ringing phone, the orderly blinking lights on the console. Every ring was a potential gateway, every burst of static a whisper from the abyss. I moved out of my apartment, unable to shake the feeling of being watched in its now silent rooms. I am a ghost in my own life now, a man haunted by a silence that is louder than any scream. The scar I carry isn't one that can be seen, but it is a deep, jagged wound on my soul. I am the man who knows the terrifying truth, that our reality is a thin, fragile veil, and there are frequencies of pain that can bleed through. There are echoes in the wires, trapped screams waiting for a compassionate ear, waiting for someone to answer the call. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in a park, trying to feel the sun on my face, a phone will ring nearby. I flinch every time. My heart seizes, my breath catches, because for a split second, underneath the cheerful melody of the ringtone, I can almost hear it. The faint, desperate crackle of static, and a thin, reedy voice whispering for help from a very dark place. I survived, but I am forever a witness, forever marked, forever listening. Some doors should never be opened, and some calls should never ever be answered. Have you ever heard a voice on the line that didn't feel quite right? A whisper of static that felt like a breath? Share your own chilling experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe for more tales from the edge of reality. You are not alone in the dark.